A loaf of bread looks like nothing special. Yet behind it stands one of the longest and most refined supply chains humans have ever built, stretching from a wild grass to the slice in your hand. Half the calories on Earth begin as a grass seed in a field. Here is the whole journey from the soil to the table. Start with what wheat actually is. It is a grass. 10,000 years ago, it was a scrawny wild plant whose seeds shattered off the stalk and scattered on the ground the moment they ripened. Early farmers noticed that a few plants held onto their seeds instead of dropping them, saved those, and planted them again. Repeat that for 100 generations and you get modern wheat. A grass engineered by patience to pack its energy into big, heavy seeds that stay put until we come to collect them. Here is what makes wheat special, and why it, above all the other grasses, conquered the world. Wheat contains two particular proteins that, when wet and worked, join into gluten, a stretchy, elastic web found in no other major grain in the same way. That web is what lets wheat dough trap gas and puff up into a light, risen loaf. Rice and maize feed billions, but they cannot do this. Grind them and wet them and you get porridge or flatbread, not a tall, airy loaf. The gluten in wheat is the quiet reason bread exists at all, and the reason this one grass ended up at the center of so many cuisines. The journey of a single loaf begins months earlier, when a drill rolls across a bare field and tucks millions of seeds a few centimeters down into the soil, in long, straight rows. Each seed carries a tiny embryo and a packed lunch of starch to fuel its first days. With warmth and moisture, a white root reaches down, a green shoot reaches up, and a field that looked like bare dirt turns over a few weeks into a sea of green blades. Not all wheat is planted at the same time of year. Much of it is winter wheat sown in autumn. It sprouts, establishes a small tuft of green before the cold sets in, then sits dormant through the winter and races away the moment spring warms the ground. That head start lets it ripen early the following summer. Spring wheat, by contrast, is sown after the frosts and harvested later the same year, and is common where winters are simply too brutal for a young crop to survive. Same plant, two different strategies for fitting a harvest into the shape of the local year. For months, the crop just grows. It tillers, meaning each plant throws out several stems, and at the top of each stem a head begins to form, wrapped in protective husks. Inside those heads, the flowers are pollinated and the grains begin to swell, filling with starch drawn down from the leaves. This is the quiet stretch of the year when a farmer can do little but watch the weather and hope the rain and sun arrive in something like the right amounts. For all those months in the field, the crop is exposed and vulnerable. A hailstorm can flatten it in minutes. A drought at the wrong moment, just as the grains are filling, can leave the heads half empty. Fungal diseases like rust can creep across a field and rob it of yield. And one of the cruelest tricks of all is rain right at harvest. If ripe grain gets wet and warm on the stalk, it can begin to sprout while still in the head, ruining it for flour. The golden field is a finish line, but it is never guaranteed until the grain is safely in the tank. Then the color changes. The field shifts from green to gold as the plants stop growing and pour the last of their energy into the grain, drying it down. The stalks turn brittle, the heads grow heavy and nod over. And if you crack a kernel between your teeth, it is hard rather than milky. That golden, rustling field is the crop announcing it is ready. Now the farmer has a narrow window to get it in before rain or wind can flatten it or spoil it. Harvest is where a machine does the work of a whole village. A combine harvester earns its name because it combines three old, back-breaking jobs into one pass. At the front, a cutter bar slices the stalks. Inside, a spinning drum threshes the heads, knocking the grains loose from the husks. Then a system of sieves and fans winnows the harvest, blowing away the light chaff and straw while the heavy, clean grain pours into a tank. The straw is spat out the back onto the field. When the combine finally rolls, the numbers are staggering in a way that is easy to miss. A single modern combine can clear many acres in an hour and swallow tons of grain, work that not long ago would have taken a whole village swinging scythes for days, then more days of thrashing by hand on a barn floor. One good field can yield several tons of grain per hectare, and a single kernel planted in autumn returns dozens of kernels the following summer. That multiplication, seed into many seeds, storable and tradable, is the quiet engine underneath every civilization that wheat ever fed. Look closely at one of those grains because everything that follows is about taking it apart. A wheat kernel has three parts. The bran is the tough outer coat full of fiber. The germ is the tiny embryo, rich in oil and nutrients, the part that would have grown into a new plant. And the endosperm is the big starchy middle, the packed lunch, which makes up most of the seed. White flour is essentially the endosperm alone. Wholemeal flour is all three ground together. Fresh from the field, grain is often a little too damp to keep. Stored wet, it heats up, molds, and sprouts. So it is dried down to a safe moisture and poured into towering silos, where it can sit for months. Grain is remarkably storable, and that is a huge part of why wheat built civilizations. A harvest gathered in a few frantic weeks can feed a city slowly across an entire year, and can be shipped across the world without spoiling. Because grain stores and ships so well, wheat became one of the first truly global foods. A kernel grown on the plains of one continent can cross an ocean in the hold of a bulk carrier and end up as bread on another. Huge quantities move around the planet every year, from the big exporting regions to the countries that cannot grow enough of their own. That trade feeds billions, but it also ties distant nations tightly together, so that a drought or a conflict in one great wheat region can push up the price of a loaf thousands of miles away. When it is time to make flour, the grain travels to a mill, but it does not go straight under the grindstones. First, it has to be cleaned because what arrives from the farm carries dust, bits of straw, weed seeds, small stones, and the odd scrap of metal. Machines sort the grain by size, shape, and weight. Magnets pull out metal and the surface is scoured. Only clean, sorted wheat is allowed to go forward. A modern flour mill barely resembles the stone mill of a village. It is a tall building threaded with pipes and elevators, moving grain and flour between floors largely by gravity and air. Wheat pours in at one end by the truckload and fine flour flows out the other, day and night, measured in tons per hour. Yet for all that scale and automation, the fundamental logic has not changed in over a century. Clean the grain, condition it with moisture, crack it open on fluted rollers, sift the fragments by size, and grind the endosperm finer and finer until it becomes the powder we call flour. Next comes a step that sounds strange. The miller deliberately adds water back to the dried grain. This is called conditioning, and it is clever. A controlled dose of moisture toughens the papery bran so it peels off in flakes instead of shattering into the flour, while it softens the starchy endosperm so it grinds cleanly. The dampened wheat then rests, sometimes for the better part of a day, letting the moisture soak evenly into every kernel before milling begins. Now the grain finally meets the machinery. Modern mills do not use flat stones. They use pairs of steel rollers turning at different speeds. The first set, the brake rollers, have a coarse, fluted surface. They do not crush the grain to powder. They crack it open, shearing the flakes of bran away from the starchy core and breaking that core into coarse chunks. The whole system is designed to separate the parts of the kernel cleanly, not just smash them together. After each pass, the cracked grain is lifted up and dropped through a tall stack of vibrating sieves that sort every particle by size. The bran flakes are pulled off to one side. The coarse chunks of endosperm are sent on to another set of rollers, smooth ones this time, that grind them finer. This cracking, sifting, and regrinding repeats over and over, through dozens of rollers and sieves, each pass squeezing a little more fine white flour out of the endosperm. Out the end comes separate streams. From a given batch of wheat, roughly 3/4 becomes fine white flour, the pure ground endosperm, and about 1/4 is the bran and germ. For white flour, those outer parts are pulled away and sold as animal feed or bran cereal. For wholemeal, they are recombined, which is why wholemeal is coarser, browner, and more nutritious, but does not keep as long because the oily germ eventually goes rancid. Not every wheat is the same, and millers care a great deal about the difference. Some varieties are hard, with a high protein content, and their flour forms strong, stretchy gluten that is perfect for bread and pasta. Others are soft, lower in protein, and their flour is better for cakes, biscuits, and pastry that should be tender rather than chewy. A miller will often blend wheat from different fields and even different farms to hit a precise, consistent recipe, so that the flour a baker buys performs exactly the same way bag after bag all year round. Now the flour can finally become bread. Mix it with water and something remarkable wakes up. Two proteins in the flour link together into long elastic strands called gluten, forming a stretchy web. Knead the dough and that web develops, growing strong and springy. Add yeast, a living microbe, and it feasts on the starch and breathes out bubbles of carbon dioxide gas, which the gluten web traps like millions of tiny balloons. Bread is really only 4 things: flour, water, yeast, and salt, and the last 2 do more than you would think. Yeast is the living engine that inflates the dough, but salt is the brake and the seasoning at once. It slows the yeast to a steady pace, tightens and strengthens the gluten so the dough holds its shape, and of course it makes the bread taste of something. And then there is time. Rush the rise and the loaf is dense and flat. Give the dough the hours it wants, and flavor develops as the yeast and natural bacteria work, which is the whole secret behind a good sourdough. Given warmth and time, those trapped bubbles inflate and the dough swells to nearly double its size. Then it goes into the oven, and a final burst of transformation happens in the heat. The gas expands one last time, the yeast dies, the gluten sets firm around all those bubbles, and the outer surface browns and crisps into a crust as its sugars and proteins caramelize. The soft, airy inside and the hard crust are the same dough, cooked at 2 different rates. There is one more thing worth noticing about this enormous chain: how astonishingly cheap it made bread. For most of history, bread was the daily anchor of the diet, and its price could decide whether cities stayed calm or rose up in anger. Governments hoarded grain, fixed the price of loaves, and fell when they failed. Today, the whole journey, from a tamed grass through a machine harvest and an industrial mill to a wrapped loaf on a shelf, has made that same bread one of the cheapest sources of calories a person can buy. The chain got so good we stopped noticing it was there. Step back and look at the whole line. A wild grass tamed over 10,000 years. A seed drilled into soil, grown through a season, ripened to gold, and gathered by a machine that replaced 100 pairs of hands. Grain dried, stored, cleaned, dampened, cracked, sifted, and ground through dozens of precise steps into flour. Then flour, water, yeast, and heat combined by chemistry into something light and warm. Every ordinary loaf is the quiet end of that enormous chain. What is remarkable is how universal this chain has become. The details shift from country to country, the varieties, the machines, the shape of the final loaf, but the underlying steps are the same the world over. Tame the grass, drill the seed, grow it through a season, gather it with a combine, dry and store the grain. Then clean, condition, crack, sift, and grind it into flour before water, yeast, salt, and heat finish the job. It is one of the few processes that almost every culture on Earth performs, each in its own way, to turn a field into food. So the next time you pick up a loaf without a second thought, remember what it really is. Sunlight and soil, captured by a grass, harvested by a machine, refined by a mill, and transformed by fire. The most ordinary food on the table is one of the most extraordinary things we know how to make.